Often I get asked, "Hey, Cassidy, I have this friend or student or whoever who is interested in exploring Shakespeare, but they're brand new and I don't want to overwhelm them. I don't want to scare them off. I want them to know how great Shakespeare is. What's the best play that they should explore first?" Well, that's the question from our listeners that I'll be answering right now on Community Questions with That Shakespeare Life. This question is always a fun one because it comes at you from different angles. I get a lot of homeschool families that are reaching out to me and they're teaching their kids and they don't want to shock their children with some of the more adult content that you can find in a lot of Shakespeare's plays. Remember that early modern playing companies were intentionally lewd, bawdy, and rife with adult humor. Going to the theater was very much this it was really a lot like going up to see a stand-up comedian or going to like the Comedy Dome or a comedy club or somewhere like that where you expected the content of what you were seeing to include lewd body jokes, especially if the play was a comedy play. So they're full of a lot of what I would call adult content. It's not really it was never intended to be shared with children. And I'll go ahead and tell you that I didn't start taking my kids to Shakespeare performances until they were older for this very reason. My oldest son is currently 15 and he has just now explored some of the Shakespeare content that I've been sharing with him. And I didn't like the idea of dumbing down the plays or removing portions of the original work. So as a general rule of thumb, I think Shakespeare is more appropriate for an older audience. And I'd place, if you're going to place the study of Shakespeare on that K through 12 spectrum, I would definitely put it in 11th or 12th grade material. Having said that, I know that I'm kind of an outlier because at least here in the US, there's a faction of educators that want to explore Shakespeare with their kids at a younger age. I think if you're going to do that, I would go with Much Ado About Nothing. There's a lot of adult jokes in that play, but it's all dialogue based. There's not a lot of performance gestures that you might need to be worried about. And young children are likely to not even notice, or definitely they wouldn't recognize those jokes because they are housed in a lot of archaic language that's just it's a lewdness that you wouldn't recognize if you're not familiar with the language, and most fourth graders really aren't. This is the same with, I see a lot of people teaching Midsummer Night's Dream to elementary kids. I don't understand that at all. And I know that's a controversial perspective for me to just come out and say, but that play is so full of, I'm going to call it adult content, but it's like how you could show that to your younger kids. I don't know. But I guess maybe if you didn't understand what was going on in it at all, you could come away from that play thinking it was all about forest fairies and a guy who dresses up as a donkey. And it's all just, really kind of Looney Tunes level material. But then, of course, you're not really understanding the play at all if that's what you think it's about. And do you really want your kids to think this play is about fun forest fairies when it's about this incredibly, I don't even know how to say it tastefully. I mean, it's just, trust me, it's all about adult behavior from start to finish. So I don't know. But see, this whole thing is why I think 11th and 12th grade is the best time. If you're going to include it in their K through 12 education, 11th, 12th grade would be the best time to do it because you don't have to dumb down the play at that age. But anyway, moving on from the age factor, the core of this question is, if you're new to Shakespeare and you're wondering, hey, I want to start seeing Shakespeare, let's switch gears and go, okay, so let's assume you're teaching 11th and 12th grade, or you are an adult who's an independent person wanting to get into Shakespeare. So first of all, let me say in huge, big, bolded letters, do not read the plays as your first exposure to Shakespeare. You see me cover words here on our channel all the time. I am a big fan of understanding the language. I love the history that is housed inside the language and the word choice, and it's beautiful. So it's definitely worth exploring. But that's for somebody that's already fallen in love with the stories themselves and wants to go that next level to really dive into the history that's hidden there, which is the people we target on our podcast and our YouTube channel. So that's why we explore a lot of that. But if you are brand new, you have to have the opportunity to fall in love with the stories first, which means you should go to the theater. Shakespeare's plays were never meant to be read like books, not ever. They were preserved in book form when the first folio was published, but that was more about a memorial to Shakespeare than it was about, hey, this is how we want you to consume his plays. They were always intended to be performance pieces. And the best example I can give you is like if somebody recommended to you, hey, you know what? Steven Spielberg is this fantastic director. His movies are incredible. You should really learn more about Steven Spielberg. Your response to that statement is not going to be, okay, well, give me one of his scripts. I'll read it. That would be bizarre. No, of course not. You're going to go watch E.T. or any of the other Spielberg films. I would suggest Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, you're going to go and watch these movies to get to know to get to know Spielberg. Shakespeare is the same way. If you want to get to know his plays, go to the theater. And as a side note here, I feel this very personally because I've never been good at reading. I'm not sure if I'm dyslexic or I was never tested as a child, so I don't know what my diagnosis might be. But text on a page is very hard for me to read. I can't look at it very long. I have to like look away and look back. Oftentimes, if I'm reading a book, I have to read the line 3 and 4 times before I'm following what's on there. So it's just never fun for me. The act of reading was always very difficult. With Shakespeare, the lines were very short and they rhymed. So I found myself moving through his story at a good enough clip that I could follow what was going on. And it got much more interesting. It was much more about the story than about the physical act of having to read the text, which was always very hard for me. And then, of course, when you could go to the theater and you can experience all of this story without having to read it all, well, that was great. I mean, I loved it. I was like, oh, I'm getting to explore Shakespeare. And I know Shakespeare, but I know it because I saw it in the theater. I didn't have to sit and do the physical act of reading. So if you have students or friends who are dyslexic or autistic or have trouble reading or seeing text on the page for any variety of reasons, Shakespeare is a great thing. Take them to the theater and you have all of these wonderful stories that injects them into the world of great literature without them having to be great readers. And that's always been a fun part of Shakespeare for me personally. Now, if you are able to be selective about what you want to go see performed, I'll circle back to Much Ado About Nothing. It's one of my favorites to see performed because the dialogue is just so fast. I mean, it's very fast, it's very witty, and it's very funny. It's very accessible when you're new to the language. You don't have to be a scholar in the 16th century English to understand what's going on. Now, you may not get everything, but you will follow it and it'll be okay. It's not full of these like long depressive soliloquies like you're going to get with Hamlet, and the plot just moves very quickly. The pace of the play keeps you entertained, and even if you get off in the weeds with all the these and thous and whatnot, you get brought back into the story pretty quickly. Now, performance wise, The Tempest is always a good one to see in the theater because you get all of the special effects. You have shipwrecks, lightning storms, magic, and it's just a really good one to go see performed because if the theater does it right, there's just all kinds of special effects. You've got lights and stage and costume. Oh, it's beautiful. It's just so much fun. It's a fun one to perform if you're in theater. It's fun to pull off because it has all of these things. So it's very good to see. So again, that's another one where even if the language is new to you and you're not following all the dialogue, you're still going to be able to keep up because of the way the story flows. Another favorite for new Shakespeareans, I like to take people to see Macbeth because people are always there. They usually have a pretty decent familiarity with Macbeth. It has a nice place in modern culture lore that people, the bloody dagger, they have some expectations about what Macbeth is going to be. So it's fun to go into it with that. I like to bring it out around Halloween or late October when the nights are cold and spooky. Macbeth is a dark play. It's full of a lot of death, obviously. There's war and there's witches and betrayal. So it's not for kids, but it is a very good play and it's exciting to see performed. It's one that you really feel enwrapped when you're there. So that one's fun to do too. Finally, I surprised myself with this last recommendation for you, and I blame the Blackfriars Theater at the American Shakespeare Center in Stoughton, Virginia, completely for the fact that my eyes were opened to how much fun this play could be. to see performed. It was my first time to see this play performed, but it's Antony and Cleopatra. Now, obviously, this one contains a lot of adult content, as well as violent deaths, and there's a suicide in this play as well. So be aware of what you're getting and make sure this is something that you would feel comfortable going to go see. But on stage, it was fantastic. And if you get the chance to go to the American Shakespeare Center, I highly recommend you get the seats on the stage. They have this option there at the Blackfriars. There's some history to that. You can explore our episode on the Blackfriars Theater with the American Shakespeare Center to find out more about why that's set up that way. But definitely sit on the stage. It was so wild and it was just an unforgettable experience. So that play was really one I would suggest that you go see as well. That's another one where people are going to already know the story pretty well, so they don't have to rely on understanding the dialogue to keep up with what's happening. They'll be pretty aware of where they're at most of the time. If you're interested in more on why I think Shakespeare plays are meant to be read, and I believe this so strongly that they should be consumed as performance pieces, I put together a whole episode on the history of whether Shakespeare published his plays. We talk a little bit about the first folio, and I walk you through just some answers about the intention of these plays and how they became bound up in books in the first place. You can watch that in the video on the screen right here.